Another year, another record-setting number of homicides in Portland. What's driving the violence and what can we do about it? I'm Andrew Thien, and this is Beat Check with the Oregonian. Up next, we've got reporter Maxine Bernstein. We'll talk about the lives lost, what we know about the factors at play, and much more. Max, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
So we just saw another terrible year in Portland in terms of gun violence and homicides overall. What's going on when you're talking to people, in these neighborhoods and in the police bureau about, this is 2 years of really dramatic increases in homicides in Portland?
I think there's great frustration among community members who are directly impacted, and as well as city officials and police who are and have been trying to make a dent, but yet the numbers are continuing and lives are continuing to be lost. So that I just sense there's tremendous frustration and an effort to try to address it, but a lot of what had been in place in years past was dismantled. And it seems like there's a patchwork effort to bring back parts of that. But so far, it hasn't made a difference.
Yeah, we'll get into some of those efforts a little bit later in our conversation here. But I just want to, as someone who's covered cops and courts and just this city in general for decades, I mean, what do you think when you see we crested 100 homicides in Portland? That is just kind of hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it's outrageous. I'm a resident of the city, and we're the last 2 years we've experienced more than 3 times what the city recorded in homicides over the last at least 2-3 decades, where it averaged between 25 to 30. So it was a tremendous jump. I mean, it didn't just happen in Portland. I mean, nationally, homicides and the murder rate increased substantially during the pandemic. But a lot of other large cities in the last year have noticed a drop-off in 2022. About 60% of major cities in the U.S. saw a drop-off in the murders, and Portland bucked that trend and hit another record-breaking year. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of the people who lost their lives last year, which you chronicled in a cataloging all of these lives. Could you tell us about one of those victims to start, PJ Baden Jr.? Who was he and how did he die?
Yeah, his full name was Parnell, but he went by PJ Baden. He was 18. He was born in Portland. He was the oldest of 3 brothers, really described as protector of his younger brothers, who are only 8 and 14. And he was at Embassy Suites Hotel near the airport, and he was attending his cousin's 17th birthday party. It was a sleepover. They had 1 or 2 hotel rooms, and around 9:30, several people, 1 to 3 people wearing masks, burst into the hotel room and, told some people to leave and targeted Baden and shot him multiple times. He was pronounced dead at the scene. It was really troubling to, speak to and meet his mom, who is just trying to handle the loss of her oldest son. She got a call that night that there had been a shooting at the hotel, and raced over there, and there's, dozens of police. She raced up the elevator, got to the 3rd floor where he was, and there were, tried to get past all these officers, and just, saw her son's legs and just didn't want to believe it was him. She's come to court. There was an arrest of of one person in the who's alleged to have been involved in the killing, but they suspect there's at least one or two others involved. And after court, she met personally with the DA handling the case, and then left and went to her car, and she just sat in her car and just was sobbing, and I spoke to her afterwards. She said the DAs didn't have more information for them about the others who were involved, and she just had really strong words about how the city has handled this. She said nobody gets completely tired of it until it happens to their family. As a city, we just sit back and continue to watch this happen. She said, we've let it continue to happen. We're reacting instead of preventing. And I thought that was really powerful and somewhat true.
Yeah. And PJ's death, unfortunately, he's indicative of, a troubling trend we've seen in Portland in the last 2 years, right? He younger than 20 years old. And also, he's a black man, a black teenager.
More than half of the people killed were people of color, and 47% were black.
What other stories from last year in terms of these deadly incidents stick with you?
Well, there are a lot. There was the random attack of an 82-year-old man who was just waiting at a TriMet bus stop near PSU, Portland State University, around 8:30 p.m. at night, and a man is accused of attacking him, throwing him into the street, and then stomping and kicking him in an unprovoked assault. He was in a coma for a week and then passed away. The man who's accused has a history of mental illness. He was actually on probation at the time from a prior year's assault of an officer. Because of the unprovoked nature of that stuck with me. The other was a case involving two twin brothers, and one was accused of fatally shooting his twin. They were 26 years old. I was at his bail hearing, and they played a video because they caught the shooting on video surveillance outside of Howard Johnson's. They were both in a car, pulled up to the front of the Howard Johnson's, got out, apparently had some dispute. One brother pushed the other. And in response, one brother's accused of pulling out a gun and firing a shot. The brother falls and crawls to the front into the lobby of the Howard Johnson's, and the accused shooter gets in the car and drives off, and leaving the twin brother who bled out in the lobby. And the accused apparently drove off, parked about 10 minutes away, and then walks back to the scene and asks the detectives, as if he had nothing to do with it, what had happened. So that, just watching that and watching him watch the video and with no obvious expression stuck with me.
Yeah.
Then there was a 36-year-old woman, Rachel Abraham, who was stabbed to death in her home by her ex-boyfriend, and she had done everything to protect herself. There were all these red flags. He had threatened to kill her in the past. She got a restraining order, a protective order, and he was arrested for violating that order. A judge declined to lower his bail, but yet the Portland Freedom Fund posted his bail, and a week later he killed her. Those are, disturbing.
Yeah. There's also the Normandale Park shooting, which I had lost track of that occurred last year, where a 6-year-old woman was shot and killed in what appeared to be pretty much a random attack. Right? I mean, it was tied to a protest, but just another event that really stuck in the city's consciousness. So, I mean, this is all pretty depressing stuff, Max. And like you mentioned, PJ Badon's mother saying that, the feeling that there isn't being enough done here. So, what has the city done to try to address the gun violence we've seen over the last 2 years? Because from an outsider's perspective, it seems like the city is either powerless or ineffective or both.
Sure. So the city has tried to reinstate a team of officers dedicated to trying to interdict this violence and particularly the gun violence. It's called the Focused Intervention Team. They were put on the street at the start of 2022, a team of 12 officers and 2 sergeants with a community oversight group. This followed the city's previous elimination of the gun violence reduction team, which was followed a prior gang enforcement team. There were concerns that the prior iterations of gun violence, gang enforcement was disproportionately stopping young Black men. And so they tried to bring back a team of officers with community oversight and put them on the streets at the start of the year. But I rode with several officers from the team recently, and they're committed to making a difference, but they themselves recognize that the challenge is much greater than they anticipated, that they're basically facing this fire hose of shootings, and they're trying to respond and investigate and make meaningful arrests, but it's much larger than they can handle. So that was one avenue. And then the other is the city. Last summer, the mayor declared a state of emergency, and the city allotted about $2.7 million to fund additional street level outreach programs. And that was awarded to 18 to 20 groups that in the past hadn't historically been funded by the city. But a lot of the funding lasted for 90 days. And then the groups were told they would have to reapply if they wanted continued funding.
Okay. And what do we know about the effectiveness of those groups?
Well, the city hired a outside consulting group to help these groups apply for the money because they never had done so in the past, and try to track and report back what they had done. But I don't think it was as effective as the city would have liked, and are hoping to provide more guidance to these groups. But those who are involved in the work say that there has to be consistent, sustained funding. Otherwise, they won't be able to establish the relationships they need to on the street with those who are committing these shootings and trying to intervene and make a difference. It can't be just, every 90 days. This has to be sustained, long-term support.
You mentioned earlier the focused intervention team, which you spent some time with. So this is a team that, has been involved in shootings itself, right? During the past year, there's something like 7 members on leave.
There were, at different parts of the year last year, the focused intervention team, there were officers who were involved in 3 separate shootings. In one shooting, there were 4 different officers of the team who were involved and on leave at one time, which took a third of the the unit off the street, which is challenging, to say the least. So yeah, they were it was one fatal shooting and one non-fatal shooting, and the third was a shooting where no one was hit, but shots were fired.
So when these teams, obviously are not at full strength, I would imagine they're not able to do their job as effectively.
I think they're just one officer described it. We're playing catch up. First of all, a lot of them are newer officers. I mean, they have a handful of years on the job. A lot of the more veteran officers who made a career of working this type of crime and shootings and gang violence have retired, and so they are starting. They've got to build relationships. They've got to build ties with the community to try to get information. A lot of the gang shootings, people are reluctant to talk. So they said they have no one, they have few people to learn from because many of the veteran officers aren't on this team. They've either retired or are working elsewhere. So, I think they're all hardworking and they're committed and they really want to make a difference. But they themselves recognize it's going to take some time.
One thing that struck me from your reporting is that downtown, the Old Town Chinatown neighborhood, was one of the deadliest neighborhoods in the city last year, right?
Yes, that's correct. There were 9 homicides in Old Town, and in one 24-hour period, there were 2 fatal stabbings just within blocks of each other. I had spoken to a restaurant worker who, was delayed to work because her bus couldn't get past one of the stabbing scenes. And when she left work, she couldn't get the bus because there was another stabbing scene just like half a block away from the restaurant. It was disturbing.
So, according to your reporting, the police bureau started tracking homelessness related homicides for the first time last year and estimated that roughly a third of the slayings involved people experiencing homelessness in 2022, either as victims or perpetrators. I mean, that seems to be an alarming increase. Or maybe do we have a sense of whether that was the case in past years, or is this an increase that we've seen?
I think that's been it's growing the last 2 years at least, with more people living on the streets. Police were saying that in the past, those experiencing homelessness may have gotten into disputes, and it might have been with knives or beatings, but now they're seeing those disputes are involving guns and leading to shootings. And a number of the people living on the streets are also suffering from mental illness. And there's a segment also addicted to drugs. So drugs and guns are leading to disputes and shootings and homicides.
So we've kind of mentioned various trends here, the homelessness situation that we just described, as well as younger people who have been shot or wounded. But I mean, is there a sense that gang violence, you mentioned gang violence as well, is that also driving this? Or are we still, like you said, playing catch up and police don't even know that gang violence is one of the major factors?
No, I think police, they can't say, for whatever reasons, they describe it as group dynamic violence. But yeah, there's been gang related retaliatory shootings and shootings among the homeless population that seem to be the 2 largest drivers of our homicide in Portland. And as well as that, there's domestic violence and drug disputes, and then just really crazy disputes over social media slights. I mean, social media is playing a big role among the younger people, and uh, even just photos that are put up to antagonize others, I'm hearing are leading to shootings.
Hmm. And in recent weeks, obviously, we've seen some shootings near or connected to Portland public high schools, right?
Yeah, there were five students who've been wounded from gunfire as a result of shootings outside three high schools: Jefferson, Cleveland, and Franklin High School. After the two shootings outside Jefferson around dismissal time, the principals of Jefferson asked for an officer to be present. And so police had a North Precinct officer at Jefferson High School from about Thanksgiving time through winter break.
Hmm.
And then there was a shooting outside Cleveland High School where a student was wounded, and then outside Franklin High School during a basketball tournament, but it was in the parking lot. And police arrested a 15-year-old boy, or took a 15-year-old boy into custody on a gun charge, but didn't say whether that teen was involved in the shooting or not. But there were two officers at the basketball tournament
Hmm.
when that shooting occurred outside.
So, just taking stock of all of this, Max, what can the city do that it isn't doing to try to intervene here? I know you talked to city leaders about Tampa and Oakland specifically, right? Of how they're trying to target gun violence there.
Yeah, there were officers, and the prior head of the city's Office of Violence Prevention. They went to Oakland, and some went to Tampa, and were and have been trying to encourage the city and the mayor's office to support a move to this focused deterrence. It's kind of Operation Ceasefire model, which did exist in Portland some 20 years ago, where everyone at the table, the police, probation, school officials, juvenile workers, judges, outreach workers,
Hmm.
community leaders would all have these call-in meetings with people who are suspected of being most involved in the violence or most at risk, and send the message that the community needs this violence to stop. The communities most affected want this violence to stop. That they don't want you to be at risk of getting harmed, and want you to stay safe, and will provide you with what you might need in terms of protection or support, to food, shelter, etc. But also send the message that if the violence continues, that all these authorities are going to work collectively to not only prosecute those involved in the shootings, but also we'll be looking at what other crimes they may be involved in. Because David Kennedy, who's sort of the guru of this model and
Hmm.
method, and helped Portland years ago put it in place, said that the most of the people who are involved in the shootings generally are involved in other crimes as well, whether it's drug dealing or could be sex trafficking, etc. But it's plus there needs to be strong relationships between the community and police. That kind of that definitely faltered after the George Floyd murder in May of 2020. There was a huge distrust of police, and police can't do this alone. They need the community to be active with them. And the other message that I got from talking to people was there has to be consistent, sustained support for not just the police who are out on the streets, but for the community, these outreach workers, what the city calls these credible messengers who are trying to intervene in these kids or young people's lives and trying to set them on the right path.
That sounds like there's a lot of work to be done.
I was at a recent breakfast where the sheriff, the chief, and the DA all spoke, and they spoke about, like the DA spoke about, oh, we're going to bring in neighborhood district attorneys and put them in the neighborhoods, and that was in place years ago, but it was discontinued, and there was a call for just basic traffic enforcement, and the police bureau's traffic division was dismantled, and they were calling for the state police to come and assist and do traffic enforcement. So some of the basic public safety efforts they're trying to get back to. And they, until they can do that, this is bad.
Yeah, and I hasten to bring this up, but this has been mentioned in the newsroom a bit this week. We're talking on Friday, but it's been a relatively quiet period in terms of we haven't had a deadly incident for nearly a month. But as before we were recording, we were talking about this, and that might not be indicative of the full picture, right?
Well, police are just they're aware of it. They're cautiously optimistic. They don't know, they can't pinpoint a reason. They say usually they do see a slowdown in shootings, violence during the cooler, rainier months in Portland. So that could be a part of it. They're knocking on wood every time someone mentions it. But I asked for, the total number of shootings, and they said so far this year, 13 people have been injured, and at this time last year, 10 people were injured in shootings. So there's been this, I think it's 22 days without a shooting. The last time Portland saw that was in the late summer of 2021.
Well, Max, before I let you go, I mean, what are kind of the major takeaways that you have or that you think readers or listeners should have? I mean, obviously you are privy to all sides of this, talking to these families that have just been devastated and talking to people in the neighborhoods and the law enforcement side of the equation too. What are your takeaways?
It was something David Kennedy told me. He's the professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. And he said if the city doesn't systematically understand and engage with the small world of groups and group dynamics that drive homicide and gun violence, it will not be effective. That's one thing. The other thing, community and outreach workers who've been around for decades said, the last time that they remember when the city worked as a cohesive group with the community, with schools, with probation, with outreach leaders was back when Vera Katz was mayor. And she went all in. She sat at the table every 2 weeks and led a real community effort to address the problems at hand. And it was beyond just, declaring a state of emergency and providing some funding. It was getting everyone together to address the hot spots or the problem of the week. And I don't see that happening. And I think it needs to happen. And it needs someone who's vocal and, not afraid to discuss what's going on and say it's not okay and do something about it. I think there's a lot of efforts all throughout the city, but it's, one community member said it seems like everyone's working in their own silos. And until they come together and really try to combine efforts and work collectively, I don't. I would hope that we have a better year this year, and I hope that I think there's efforts to come towards that, but I haven't seen it yet.
Well, we all, I think, hope that it's a better year this year. And thanks for all of your reporting on this grim topic, but it's an important one. And thanks for coming on to talk about it.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Beat Check with the Oregonian. I'll share links in the episode notes to some of Max's stories, including the year-end look at the overall violence in Portland. If you like this show, give us a 5-star rating and review in Apple Podcasts. That's how people find it. Or tell a friend, share the word, share the show. The best way to support our journalism and journalism like Max Bernstein's is with a subscription to Oregon Live. You can do that at OregonLive.com/pod support. Until next time.